Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Village Global's Venture Stories. I'm here today joined by a very special guest, Shrav Mehta. Shrav is a portfolio founder and CEO of the company Secureframe, as well as a longtime friend. Shrav, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Shrav, you've been at a bunch of companies that have done well. You've been at Lob, you've been at Pilot, you've been at Scale, you've been at Hired. I may be missing one or two more there. What was the inspiration? I know you wanted to be a founder. Walk us through how you walked through the idea maze and came up with Secureframe.
Yeah. So great question. Early on, when I was in high school, I was programming and building a bunch of different Android apps, and I had grown this to like a significant amount of revenue. But at the time, the apps I built weren't very good, and I had like the first mover advantage. So, that worked for quite a while, and then I got completely crushed by, all these apps that were much better. But, after that experience, I knew I wanted to create another company, but I wanted to learn from like the best founders I could. So I actively tried to seek out, all the best founders I could and tried to work with them. I think, over time, some of the characteristics of like the startups I like to join and of the ones that, have ended up being successful have become like more clear over time. So, initially, I think when I joined most of these companies, I spent a good amount of time with the founders before joining. With Lob, I had actually met them at some event, and I had actually used them for a company I was, helping at the time, implement some direct mail. So it ended up being like the perfect fit. And I started learning more about Lob, the business. It was like very early on at the time, and it was getting more and more interesting. And I think at the point I had, joined, I had initially probably spent, well over like 50 hours kind of with the team. And that really like helped me understand, what the vision was, how they operated. And I think that just tells you a lot.
Totally. But before we get into the broader space, you were evaluating companies in sort of adjacent spaces. One of the ones you were thinking a bit about was recruiting. The other, you were thinking about sort of education around recruiting. What was interesting there, and why did you end up not pulling the trigger?
With recruiting, it's a problem that everyone has. Every founder, if you talk to them, usually the number one problem that they have is recruiting. So every founder has the problem. And then, it's actually quite easy to make money off recruiting. So, if every hire, if you take a contingency fee of 15%, I think that's what most of these, marketplaces are taking these days, you make like $20,000 to $30,000. And it may feel like validation in the recruiting space, but things, get significantly, more difficult at scale. And this initial like making $20,000 or $30,000, which I think, many startups, would, that would be a significant amount of revenue. In the recruiting space, it actually doesn't tell you that much. Like it kind of gives you a false validation or a false idea that, hey, this idea can really work, because recruiting is like it's inherently very personal. Changing jobs for a person is, a big change in their life. And, the talent pool is quite limited today. It's actually quite hard to build a company with a limited talent pool, or it's hard to, really scale recruiting with a talent pool that's limited, which I would say is definitely the case in like the technology industry. I think the things that ended up being more interesting are like, how do we increase the size of the talent pool? Now, some of this will just come with time, but I think, some of the companies out there like Lambda School have really been able to scale up their program and drive results. And I think that's where, my interests are, is like, how do we increase the talent pool rather than, find someone like, a lot of different opportunities. Because I think a lot of people can find opportunities in the technology space by looking at job boards. I think in the technology space, there's just a lot of like options if you want to get hired or find a job, and there's a lot of platforms out there. So I think there's almost too many people focused on that problem because everyone has it.
Totally. And so, if in terms of expanding the talent pool, what startups are you interested in potentially investing in that might do that, or what what sort of Lambda is one path. What are other paths of companies that could potentially do that?
There's kind of a set of these startups that, are finding new ways to educate people. And, one of them is like Career Karma. So they help you find, the best dev boot camp. I think there's something interesting there because, before, you have like the common application or you have a college guidance counselor at schools that tells you, hey, here's the college you should go to. And, it's kind of interesting that someone hasn't really done this for dev boot camps. I mean, I think more importantly, there's a whole section of people that don't know, hey, like a developer boot camp is a great way to, get a programming education and get some industry experience and really learn something. But, people, it's not yet in the same category as schools. Like, school counselors at high schools aren't suggesting that. So I think that's an interesting, space. I think there's, number of, platforms and organizations like Make School that have, provided an alternative to college. And I think, Make School is even accredited now. I'm not 100% sure about that. So I think we're going to see a huge change in, the types of options that are available to folks to get an education for like for a job in the technology industry, or honestly, in probably every industry.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to Secureframe. How did you get to what sort of the vision of the company is, and how you sort of navigated that specific space to choose that problem versus other problems you could have chosen in space?
Yeah, so when I was working at these startups, we were selling to a lot of enterprise customers, sometimes Fortune 10, Fortune 100 companies. And at the time, what would essentially happen is these companies would send you a really long questionnaire. I've seen questionnaires that are like sent to you in Excel with like 3,000 rows in them with just a bunch of questions, so many of them that don't apply. And kind of the expectation is that you answer these questionnaires, and it takes a lot of time. So, when you're a startup and maybe, in most of these cases, we were like less than 50 employees, this is a lot of time to just fill out the questionnaire, but it's not just about filling out the questionnaire. It's actually making sure that you can answer the questionnaire in a way that's appropriate, right? So these questionnaires would have things like, hey, have your employees gone through security awareness training? Do you have a business continuity policy? Do you have like an information security policy? Do you secure your Wi-Fi in this way? And it just takes so long to implement it because, oftentimes startups don't have all these things in place. So, as I started to see this problem more and more, I had friends that were kind of reaching out to me, asking for help with various items. And it ended up being that, everyone was needing to get like SOC 2 compliant or another certification called ISO 27001 compliant, or they were basically doing all the things to get compliant by, answering these security questionnaires. They were essentially having to go through that same process. So, when I saw how long and painful it was, the average company was spending, at least 6 to 8 months, getting compliant. They were spending a lot of money. There were a lot of failure points, and everything was kind of done manually in spreadsheets and data rooms. I felt that this was an opportunity that, required a better product or something better in the space. Essentially, with Secureframe, we want to be like the QuickBooks of compliance. We want to be, the software that's super easy to use. It's easy to implement from day one. It doesn't take you 6 to 8 months to get ready. And it's not like checking a checkbox. We actually want to make sure that companies are secure. We don't want them to just be checking boxes in order to, pass these security reviews. We actually, want to make sure that companies are, doing the right things and, maintaining a high, security posture.
Yeah. And talk more about how startups should be thinking about security and what they should be doing.
We're seeing more and more security and data breaches happening. And in the last year, my personal data was exposed in 20 different leaks. Most of these leaks weren't direct leaks of, my passwords or anything like that. But it's becoming surprisingly frequent. And this is something, that, I've heard from a lot of different folks. There's a lot of different startups and companies that are responsible for these data breaches. And I think part of the issue is that companies tend to be a lot more reactive when it comes to security than proactive. And it's important to get some of these, best practices in from day one. and not just the technical security, but like your operational security as well. Are your employees going through security awareness training? Are you assessing the risk of all your vendors? Because oftentimes the way data is leaked is usually not even through the main company, but through like a third party vendor. I think the important thing is to, take some steps to be more proactive and get the basics in place from day one. That way, you don't have to react to a situation in which you leaked or had a data breach.
Totally. Talk about how people have thought about privacy and security now in 2020 versus 2015 or 2010. Like, how have things changed here?
Yeah. So I mean, I've been noticing that in the last 1 to 2 years, there have been so many people getting hacked. I've known countless people who've had their passwords cracked, and or they were exposed in a data breach. Someone tried it out, and they were lucky enough to be saved by like two-factor authentication, or like they'll get a text saying, "Hey, someone logged into your account. Can you verify this?" And I've seen careers get ruined because of information posted online. Many people's addresses, property records, personal information is online. And the world, I feel like, has gone a lot less private, and as a result, like a lot less safe online. Now, what I think is even crazier is that there are companies that charge you to remove your data, like your personal address, your phone numbers, from their public databases, and that's wild. They're literally selling your cell phone numbers and addresses for profit. Just in general, privacy has become a huge concern for everyone, and it's not binary. I think we are going to see a GDPR equivalent in the U.S. very soon. The year 2019, began with a significant increase in bill introductions, addressing various aspects of data privacy. And bills or drafts of bills have been introduced in at least 25 different states in the U.S. So I think we're going to see a lot of legislation to attack this as well. I think privacy and data security is something that people are caring a lot more about.
Totally. Zooming out, how have venture capitalists viewed the space over the past decade? Like, how have startups in this category performed, and what have been the characteristics of the ones that have?
I think there's a lot of security startups today, but I think we're really at the beginnings, the space. Security is getting more and more difficult to maintain every day, and I think there's going to be a new set of companies that help with this from all different angles. I think, some of the stuff that's, quite interesting is, two-factor authentication. I think this is kind of, commonplace, in, business environments or in workplaces. But now, we're seeing an increased use of it in people's personal logins or in people's personal environments. One of the startups I think a lot about is, how do we make two-factor authentication a lot easier for folks? Because it's not, super intuitive or easy to use for everyone. But, one thing that's interesting is like every Mac, many PCs have, fingerprint sensors. And, now that's been approved to use as like a two-factor auth key for many sites. But I think, there's a very interesting startup in that space. I won't go into too much details, but I think someone should like build an SDK to make two-factor auth of any sort or any form much easier to implement. There's a lot of room for startups to help with website security and fraud detection, vulnerability scanning, online payments. There's a lot of room there to kind of optimize, optimize risk and, prevent fraud. I think there's a lot of opportunities still to build like a good MDM solution or mobile device management solution. So I think, there's a lot of opportunities in this space, and a lot of this technology is like very new. I think we'll see a lot more to come.
Yeah, say more about if you were a VC solely focused on the space today in 2020. What more you'd be looking for in terms of if you have requests for startups or sort of evaluation criteria of how you think about what startups need to have for you to want to get excited that's sort of unique to the space?
Yeah, I mean, in general, when I think about startups that I would want to join or like invest in, I look for a product that I feel like I could sell or get my friends to buy, and oftentimes I'll usually do is go to some of my friends and try to sell it to them, or I'll reach out cold to people on LinkedIn if I don't have someone that's really the right persona or the right type of buyer. I'm going to and see what they think. And I think that's like a very easy way to like validate things. Oftentimes I'll talk to someone and, they'll be completely against the idea or what we're building. And you'll kind of ask some, more questions, and, you ask them some things like, well, if you were to do it, how would you build it? And you can kind of get an idea of, is this product the right thing? Do you think it'll sell? How does this audience or type of persona, respond to it? Or is maybe the person I introduced it to, too small or too large of a company, or they're looking at it from a different perspective, and we might, be trying to target a different persona. So, I think a lot about what who is the market for a product, because for example, there's a lot of products in the B2B space around security, but when it comes to like consumer security or like personal security, there's not a lot of great products in that space.
What's your anti-request for startups?
I don't like to discourage anyone from working on any startup or anything that they're passionate about. But, for me personally, I think in the recruiting space, there's a lot of competition. But for me personally, I think the recruiting space, it's a space that, everyone knows because everyone has this problem with recruiting. But I haven't really seen the right product come out or the right thing to differentiate some of these folks or make recruiting a 10x better experience. I think it's a very challenging problem, and it's something that I think a lot of people are working on, and I'm not I'm not quite sold on anything in the space just yet.
Beyond security more broadly, why don't you talk about what sectors you're interested in, or what other frameworks you use when you evaluate your investing? You're starting to angel invest. We're doing some, work together with Village Global on the investing side. Why don't you talk a little bit more about what excites you right now and how you think about it?
Yeah, I think in general for me, the type of companies that excite me are, I think what many people would call, quote unquote, boring companies. And these are companies that might be like processing paperwork or something that was like done in spreadsheets before. I'm excited about API companies in particular, because when I think APIs, I think like distribution. I think there's a lot of opportunities in the API space that, really haven't been attacked. I think, there is going to be an increased need for APIs and developer tools. So I'm really excited about that space in particular. I think it's growing significantly. I am also, just excited about other, companies in the security and compliance space. Like I said, I think we're at the beginnings of a lot of the companies in this space, and it'll be exciting to kind of see what comes in the next few years.
Totally. Let's go deeper on boring companies. What types of spaces within boring companies are you particularly excited about, or what's important when you look at CEOs who are building boring companies?
Yeah, one is I think it's important for someone to really be an expert in this space or in this problem, or someone who's really experienced the pain and the problem themselves. I recently invested in this company called Finch. They're basically building an API for HR and payroll systems. And I think what was particularly interesting about this space is, one, there's been many companies that have tried to integrate with these systems, and it takes a lot of work to build these integrations. We've had to build some HR integrations of our own, and firsthand, we saw the pain. There's a lot of security requirements because of the sensitivity of this information. So there was just generally a lot of problems that I saw for people who wanted to integrate and get this data through an API. So when I saw Finch, I immediately understood it and saw the problem. And I knew several other folks that had the same problem, because oftentimes when we're demoing our product, folks ask us, how did we build this integration? We're trying to do something similar, and we'll talk through it and realize, hey, this is something it was a difficult problem as well. So when I had introduced, them and talked to them, or talked about them with a few of these folks, I think they instantly got the problem too. And that was like I think a very obvious solution to me. The other things I look for is, who are the early customers? Like who are they trying to sell to, or does the company have an idea of who they're trying to sell to? Because oftentimes, I talk to companies and, they are selling to a number of different personas, and, the focus isn't exactly clear. I think when things take off, when you have like one really strong group of customers, like just like a niche or a segment that really loves the product, and if you can expand within that, I guess niche, as you might call it at the time, things can, scale very quickly. Then you can kind of expand to another segment. And now you're building a product that's, 10x better for these specific use cases. And if you can get enough use cases, you're starting to build a really nice, big business.
Totally. Let's talk more about education. Where are you excited in education, whether it's higher ed or more broadly, or how do you think about that space in terms of where you may make any bets in the future?
I think top tier schools will remain. But I think, there's going to be a lot more options, for students to choose from. I think it's going to be a lot more common to see someone, go to like Lambda school, or maybe, do an apprenticeship, or, dive straight into a job from just being like self-taught. I think those are going to be more and more common in the future. I don't think schools are, going away. I think there's a lot of people who learn really well in a school setting. For me, I was never really someone who learned well in schools. I really needed to be, doing the thing or practicing it or getting work experience to get a lot better. And, I think that was a better method of learning for me than school. And I think, we're going to see people, have a lot more options to choose between soon.
How do you think about learning a new industry or space? What's the methodology that you use?
Yeah, so, I like to just explore, and I have a natural curiosity to kind of just go into the rabbit hole with things. And, the things that I've found best for, learning a new space is, one is I'll try to go to like Twitter or Reddit and, see if there's like a community that's like already been built around this. And, if it's on Reddit, I can look at like the like the sidebar or the wiki, and kind of read through everything. So, if I want to learn about projectors, so I can decide, what projector should I buy for a home theater system, or, should I buy a projector, or should I just, buy a TV? I can go to Reddit, like community on projectors, and they have like a whole Wikipedia talking about like what are the best projectors, which ones, fail. There's a lot of information, but I think, so sometimes, I'll, go to like the top commenters in a subreddit, or I'll, message someone who's tweeted about something interesting, and I'll try to just, set up a call to pick their brain and ask them, all these questions. I think that's also a great way of kind of discovering what I would call like the unknown unknowns. What are the things that you don't know about? What are the things that you're not thinking about? Because, some of these folks, probably have encountered or dealt with the things that you're about to run into, or, have gone through their own learning experience. So I think that's really helpful. When I was learning to, fly planes, one of the things that I had a very difficult time trying to figure out what's the correct learning path. And then eventually, when I met more folks in the community who, were pilots, I was able to ask them questions, and, it was very clear that there was like a optimal way to get your pilot license.
Any other things that we haven't yet discussed that you look for when or that you recommend others look for when investing or joining early stage startups?
I mean, I think when you join an early stage company, you really have to, understand the team. I think, not everyone, has the opportunity to spend, 40 hours with a company. But, if you do, or if you have an opportunity to really spend more time with the team, understand how they operate, what your day-to-day could look like, I think that helps a lot. One thing I tell people is when you're joining an early stage company, you want folks who have like a clear vision, who are very focused, a little bit intense. If the company culture, in the beginning isn't just a little bit intense, I think it's almost like a red flag to me. You want people who are, very passionate, very committed. For the founders, this should be some of the most important. This should be like one of the most important things that they're working on, right? So, I think that's stuff that you understand, as you spend more time and how.
Totally. What have you learned, or what's your best advice on recruiting in terms of how to build a talent magnet? What you think founders make mistakes when recruiting early teams? What have you picked up on?
I've spent a lot of time, trying to really dig in and figure out, how do you, become really great at recruiting. And I think, there's a lot of different styles, a lot of different things that work. But I think the number one thing is you just have to invest in it. You have to put in the time. A lot of the best hires that, I've made in the past have been people that, we were engaging with for like 3 or 4 months. And then, the right time came in and, we were already kind of ready to make an offer. We were, the ones they were already talking to, and, we were able to bring them onto the team. I think the other thing is you have to kind of use your network, quite heavily early on. It's really hard to get, your first, 5 or 6 employees to join unless they have a lot of belief, they have a lot of belief in you. They have a lot of belief in the product, the company, the team. It just takes a lot longer to convince some of these folks. What I also tell people is that, sometimes people just aren't a fit for like the stage that you're at. And you should be careful to recruit people who really, understand what they're signing up for. Oftentimes I'll see, I'll see people who sign up to do engineering and they're expected to sell and demo to customers and do all these other things that, maybe they aren't as comfortable with or they don't really want to be doing. And it ends up, not being the best fit. I think it's important to be super transparent about what your responsibilities are going to be, what the expectations are going to be. And that results, in just a much better experience for, I think, both the company and the employee. So I think it's just really important to, really assess that from the beginning.
Yeah. Now, you started out as a developer, but really developed or gained sort of a skill set in sales and marketing. Why don't you talk about that journey and why you did that and then how you did that?
I think, marketing is becoming a lot more technical. Today, your number one way of advertising your business is through essentially your website or your marketing website. So you need a developer to kind of update the site. And today, you're seeing companies use Webflow a lot more to host their marketing websites. But even then, you need to know a little bit about, styling and design and CSS to kind of really, put together a nice site. I think there's just a lot of ways where marketing is getting more technical. And at a lot of companies, especially like, probably more so in the consumer space, there's a lot of growth engineers that are focused on optimizing like landing pages, optimizing sign-up flows, optimizing referral flows. So there's a lot of different things that I think fall under marketing. The core of it is that marketing is getting, more technical. So, when I was building these Android apps, I found that I was spending a lot of my time really working on like marketing it and sharing it with everyone, posting on forums, and getting it more exposure. And, that's how I was able to get, some of these apps to, over 500,000 installs at the time when the Android marketplace did not actually have like a ton of users or a ton of people downloading apps. So I saw that I could use a lot of my engineering experience, to help grow companies, and that's kind of why I made that transition.
Let's go deeper on both of those skills. How should founders be thinking about developing a marketing skill set?
I think the founders or the CEO of the company, should be essentially your chief marketing officer. They're like the evangelist for the company. They're the ones who are, should be, shouting their brand from everywhere. So I think the number one thing is that like you are, like as a founder of a company, you are your first marketer, and you kind of have to invest in it. So when you think about marketing in an early stage startup, I think, the founders are essentially, the first marketers of the company. They're the ones evangelizing the company. They're the ones spreading the word about the company. But for most B2B companies, I think you want to start off with sales. And I think this is a very common notion, but you really want to talk directly with your customers. You want to see, whether they're interested in the product, whether more feature development is needed, what requests that they have. And that's a lot easier if you start off by selling directly to them. Now, at some point, you have a product that works for a good segment of customers and you want to start marketing to them. I think, that's when you can start investing, a little bit more in marketing. I think one thing a lot of startups should consider doing early on is building a blog. It takes a while to build readership to get to the point where you're able to write a decent number of blog posts per month. It's hard to maintain the quality, and it's hard to know what to write about. But as one of the founders of the company, or as someone who is probably very close to their customers at this time, you should have an idea of the questions your customers are asking, what articles or what content might be most helpful. And, if you invest in this early on, the SEO benefits start to really add up, in years like, 1, 2, and 3, right? So I think it's important to invest in content early on. The other way I like to think about marketing is just like experiments. There's no one thing that works for every company. There are companies I've had in the past where content is the number one channel. It represents like 80% of the leads. And then when you bring that same strategy over to another company, it's not as effective, but paid advertising is a lot more effective. So every company has channels that, work differently. I think how you decide a channel depends on where your audience is. So, if you have an audience of developers, they might hang out in places like GitHub, on Stack Overflow. They're probably using tools like AWS and Google Cloud. They might be on Twitter. They might be in other developer communities. So, based on, where your community is, that's how you kind of decide what channels, might make the most sense to experiment with at first. And once you start running these experiments, you're going to have a lot of failures, but you're going to have some that work really well. And you basically want to double down on the ones that work well, start optimizing and collecting that low-hanging fruit. So really, the way I think about marketing is just like a series of experiments.
How about sales? How should founders get up to speed in terms of how they can learn sales quickly and build out a sales org?
Yeah, so, I think Y Combinator actually has a bunch of, great videos as part of like startup school around like, early sales. There's some, books out about, building out an early sales organization, like Founding Sales. That book is great. It's written by Pete, who's the founder of Atrium, where they help with like sales analytics. So I think that is probably one of the best books, that I would recommend to startup founders for like thinking about sales.
Yeah. What common mistakes do you see enterprise founders make as it relates to go-to-market? Or what common misconceptions people have go-to-market, or how should they do that well?
I think hiring is where it's easy to make, the most mistakes for sales. Startup sales, the attrition tends to be pretty high. And, part of the reason I think this is, when the founder is selling, it tends to be that the founder knows everything about the roadmap. They know a lot more about the customers. They can make a lot of decisions right on a call that, an average salesperson might not be able to. So it can be really hard making that, transition from, founder-led sales to, having your first rep do sales. I think the stuff I see that, can be more difficult is, one, you don't exactly know what's achievable because, you might not have been selling that long as a company. You're not sure how achievable quota is. Or maybe you haven't had a lot of success selling yourself. So when you hire this like second or this first salesperson, I think it's important for you to kind of understand that, be like, clear about expectations. Try to find ways to like de-risk the opportunity, or, if you feel like you're not ready for that yet, is to continue selling yourself. I think one of the other mistakes I see is, founders aren't spending enough time, selling product themselves, or they stop selling the product too early and they, start to lose that closeness with customers. And I think it's really important to maintain that early on. Sales hiring is one of the most challenging aspects of, building an early sales organization. It can be really difficult to scale a sales org if you don't know who your target persona is. Because if you don't know who your target persona is, you might be selling to someone else entirely, someone who might not be the decision maker, someone who might not, understand the full value of the product, someone you might not really be able to qualify. And, oftentimes I do see people selling to the wrong market or the wrong person. Or instead of talking to a decision maker, you're actually talking to really like a champion or someone who's excited about your product, but, isn't really the decision maker or the person who will be, signing the purchase order. So I think it's really important that you have an idea of who you're selling to, because once you can do that, you have an idea of, how to market to them, what messaging is important to them, what features that are important to them and that they care about. You can be a lot more effective by having a clear customer profile from the beginning.
Awesome. Shrav, that's a perfect place to wrap. For people who want to learn more about, follow you and learn more about Secureframe, potentially for their startup or startups they know, where can you point them to?
Yeah, just check us out at secureframe.com, and we'd be happy to help and chat.
Awesome. Yeah, Shrav, we are honored to have you in our portfolio, and you're one of the more active mentors to other founders. So if you're a startup, you should work with Secureframe, one, because it has an excellent product, but also two, because Shrav is looking out for your success. Shrav, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, check us out at secureframe.com, and we'd be happy to chat.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc.